moving on. So we're actually gonna have a whole panel here. It's I'm very excited about this. This will be speaking on a variety of representatives and different researchers who have done a lot of complex but necessary work about building coalitions between the labor movement and the environment. And cool, let's get the whole Brady Bunch screen on for a second, and I'll do the introductions. Gretchen, what's up? If you're on, you can join too. Oh, now JB left. Now Gretchen's on. Great. Look at this full Brady Bunch screen, and I'm going to do some introductions of just who they are on the screen, and then you can all hide again, and then you can come back on, so that way you don't have to like awkwardly look while someone else is talking for like 15 minutes. I might enjoy that, but I'm sure you wouldn't. So Professor Obach is the professor of sociology at SUNY, so State of University of New York, at New Paltz. So Brian, Professor Obach, you want to wave hello to everybody on the Zoom world? We also have Michael Leon Guerrero, who's the executive director of the Labor Network for Sustainability. I saw you wave your hand, so I didn't have to ask you to do that. We have a dear friend of mine, Gretchen Newsom from IBW 569, who is the political director of one of the powerful, strong union in San Diego, thinking about environmental justice and worker. Okay, and last but not least, we have JB Tango, who is the West Coast director for the Blue Green Alliance. So we're going to hear from a range of different real-life examples of how we actually build coalitions to make this happen. So with that, we're going to start off with Professor Obach, who I got this personal moment here, is joining us all the way from Turkey. So I think it's at what time? 3 o'clock in the morning right now?
It's 3:54.
3:54. Zoom is awesome, right? We can bring the world together. This is awesome. So Professor, the floor is yours. Everyone else, thank you for being on this Brady Bunch screen for a minute. I will call on you when it's your time to take the full stage. So with that, Professor Obach, the floor is yours to talk about what your research and so forth.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Josh, and thank the organizers for inviting me. This is a fundamentally important gathering. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the fate of humankind depends on this and similar efforts. I was invited to speak here today because I dedicated a good part of my life to studying how these two vital movements can be brought together, the long historic struggle to improve the lives of working people and the relatively more recent but no less important movement to protect the ecosystems on which all life depends. I'm a unionist myself. I'm on the executive board of my local, and I've been involved in labor basically my entire life. But I'm also an environmentalist, and I recognize that all that we have achieved, the lives that we built, the society we've created will be lost if we undermine the very foundation of human civilization, the ecosystem upon which we depend. The book that I wrote on the basis of my research is titled simply Labor and the Environmental Movement, but it has a subtitle, Labor and the Environmental Movement, The Quest for Common Ground. And it is a quest, it's a struggle. And it's not because we as unionists and environmentalists have different interests. As people, we ultimately have exactly the same interests, to have a healthy, stable, secure, fulfilling lives. The struggle emerges because we are organized around different aspects of our interests. I could be an oil worker who belongs to a union that's fighting to keep a refinery in operation, and at the same time belong to an environmental group fighting to end our dependence on oil, because I know that my children won't be able to survive if we keep burning fossil fuels and heating the planet. How could this be that a dedicated member of two organizations is on the opposite side of the same issue? And the reason is because each of these organizations are designed to narrowly pursue one aspect of my interests without considering the other things that are important to me. And leaders of those organizations, and I know we have many here, understandably feel that they have to act in a particular manner. Because after all, who wants to be part of a union, an organization devised to protect my interests as a worker, that is not going to fight in every possible way to protect my job and my income and my economic security? And at the same time, who wants to be part of an environmental group organized on the basis of my interests as an inhabitant of an ecosystem in crisis that does not do everything possible to prioritize the ecological crisis? So the leaders of these two types of organizations feel obligated to act on one aspect of their members' interests that the organization is designed around, be it a union or an environmental group. But of course, the irony is that this is self-defeating in the end. It hurts the members of both groups who are ultimately the same people, or at least who have the same broad interests in a secure job and a healthy planet. And what's worse, and I think Josh sort of made reference to this, is that that division can be exploited by our real enemies, those who are only concerned about short-term profit and who are willing to sacrifice workers and the planet to get it. Now, this tension is not inevitable in all cases. There was some great efforts made in the 1970s and 80s to bring workers and environmentalists together. There were actually many efforts like this in many places, but much of it was carried out by Tony Mazzocchi, who was a leader of what had been the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union, later merged with the Steelworkers. And he had the key insight that the hazards and toxic materials that were harming his members inside the workplace were the same toxins that were harming the environment and the community outside of the workplace. And as a result of his work and others, a lot of important health and safety legislation came out of that. Now, in this instance, unions and environmentalists found common ground. It was in the immediate interest of both unions and environmentalists to advance workplace health and safety regulation to restrict the use of toxic materials. We need to seek out that common ground, and it was good to hear Dr. Zabin referring to these kinds of opportunities, and to recognize that we can greatly strengthen our hand if we work together. I've had legislators tell me, it's one thing to have a labor advocate, pay them a visit, and it's another thing when they've got an environmental lobbyist in their office. But when they come in together, it's a different story entirely. It's incredibly powerful. They're used to appeasing us one by one. They don't know what to do when these two incredible forces show up together. So I was pleased to see that finding that common ground is central to the work of this gathering. We need to work from that common ground, but we need to recognize that we won't always have that opportunity, that this clear, immediate common interest is not always present. And that's where the really hard work begins, when we attempt to build coalitions of unions, unionists and environmentalists. In some sectors, that work is easier. In service sector unions and public employee unions, they can incorporate environmental concerns with relative ease. Not that simple, as we've heard from some speakers, when it comes to the industrial sector unions and building trades. Sometimes the short-term goals of labor organizations directly conflict with the short-term goals of an environmental group. Closing a toxic, polluting facility means an immediate, significant loss to the workers employed there. It's real, and that can't be denied. Now, the way that these workers suffer is no different from what employers do all the time. As we know, replacing workers with technology or moving operations offshore, bringing in union busters. But when it comes to environmental issues, those employers will, of course, pretend like they're workers' best friend and trying to stop these meddling environmentalists. Fortunately, most workers are smart enough to see through that, but the situation is nonetheless a political minefield, and it takes hard work to find solutions and to create those bonds, to create these coalition organizations. It takes insight, it takes intelligence, it takes gatherings like this, and it takes long-term, comprehensive vision of who we are as human beings, a recognition that we are not just workers and we're not just environmentalists. We don't just need a good job. We don't just need a healthy planet. As human beings, we need both of these things. And at times, finding solutions requires that we sacrifice short-term, narrow, organizational self-interest for longer-term collective interest. That may mean recognizing, for example, that not every coal industry job will be saved. Employers have already eliminated almost all of them anyway with technology and as a result of market forces. But our ecological survival requires that we stop burning coal and ultimately almost all fossil fuels. Rather than waste time and effort fighting to save that last coal mining job, those workers and their unions are better off joining with environmental advocates to get the best possible deal for new opportunities. And in order to achieve that kind of support from unions, in some cases, environmentalists will need to put off an immediate short-term policy victory to ensure that workers' interests are protected to the greatest extent possible. To make sure, with the example that was raised before, that if there's going to be a solar subsidy policy, that it is truly contingent on installers being paid, having good union jobs, union-paying jobs. Put real effort into fighting for a just transition program that really compensates displaced workers. Take a stand on increasing the minimum wage. And that support from environmentalists has to be sincere. I've been in the labor movement a long time, and what I've noticed is that labor activists are good at smelling bullshit, probably from taking so much from employers. But environmentalists must authentically support workers, not just rhetorically and but with real political action. And some environmental groups are doing this. I saw some on the agenda who we'll be hearing from, who are really taking a stand for workers. But it has to be a long-term, concerted, committed effort in order for organizationally these kinds of groups to come together. And the reason it's such a challenge is because organizationally it has risks. When I was doing this research and interviewing labor leaders, someone referred to what the environmentalists are doing. But there are many environmentalists organized in many different groups, and it's a competitive environment for nonprofit organizations. When one environmental group takes a strong stand for workers, there will always be another out there saying that you're selling out by thinking of anything other than the ecological crisis at hand. And that's important because potential members and funders may be drawn away from environmental groups that take that risk, that take a stand for workers, and who might seem not to be prioritizing the most stringent environmental position. Union leaders face the same criticism if they have the courage to work with environmental advocates. Employers will tell their employees that their union leaders are selling them out and working with the big bad environmentalists and ruining, eliminating jobs. In fact, my research showed that it was employers who were funding many of the supposed worker organizations that were fighting against environmental regulation in the 1990s. So both labor and environmental groups have to have the insight and the courage to see that we are whole people, that we need both good, well-paying, secure jobs and a safe community and a healthy environment for ourselves and our children. And this is where I suspect that many of you who come to a meeting like this come into the picture. In my research, I found that behind every successful labor environmental alliance, every time a successful coalition was formed, there were what I call bridge builders or coalition brokers, individuals who played a key role in bringing these groups together, who were able to bridge that divide. Sometimes this was a union activist who had an environmental background, or an environmental leader who came from a union family, or just someone who recognized that this is an absurd situation, that we can't be fighting amongst ourselves when there is so much that unites us, that has to unite us. And I believe I've met several such people, these vital coalition brokers in the course of learning about this conference, the people that brought us all here together. Hopefully this meeting will spur even more bridge builders. And I want to thank you for having me here, and thank you for recognizing the fundamentally important project that you're undertaking. And I look forward, if we have the time, to discuss more about how we can make this happen.
Great. So I'm glad you got a whole lot of hands. So here's the thing. We're going to take question and answering at the end. I'm going to put them all on the Brady Beyond screen at the same time. Then we can field questions. So it won't be the last time you see Professor. Professor Robach, I got to say, I was listening to you, and the whole time I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much. We'll be hearing from you in a second. So if you have questions for the professor, great. We're going to get to them in just a bit. So next up, I'm going to bring on Michael Leon Guerrero from the Labor Sustainability Network for Sustainability. which we're really excited to have you here. Why not, if you can, tell us all about Labor Network for Sustainability, and then also some of the work that you all do across the country.
Great. Thank you, Josh. And also thank you to both the Alameda and Contra Costa Central Labor Councils for inviting us to participate tonight. LNS was actually a co-sponsor of the last Alameda Labor Council Convergence, and it's so great to see that this process has grown and become a regional event. And it's also another sign that there's a growing labor climate movement in this country. So the Labor Network for Sustainability was founded in 2006 by labor leaders. We're a national network of unions, worker organizations, and climate justice allies, and we're working to build a powerful labor climate movement to secure an ecologically sustainable and economically just future. We have a small team of staff in 7 states, including California, New Mexico, Mississippi, Wisconsin, Maryland, North Carolina, and Connecticut. I'm actually zooming in today from New Mexico, so not quite as far as Turkey, but you know, about an hour ahead of you all. So, and LNS, what we do is actually, speaking of bridge building, but Professor Obach, is that we see our job as working to build those bridges between movements, and at the same time pushing us all to move further and faster to address the climate crisis. Organizing local, regional, and national convergences like this have actually been a core part of our work, and they've been great spaces to share lessons and strategies for building labor climate collaborations. And in that light, we hope to see many of you next year at our 4th National Labor Convergence on Climate, and we'll send the details of dates and location in the near future. So in terms of our current work, I'll start with a report that we released earlier this year called Workers and Communities in Transition, which I think is real relevant to what folks have already talked about. It was based on a year-long Just Transition listening project. And this was a joint partnership with environmental justice allies and scholars from 4 universities, including Dr. Vivian Price from CSU Dominguez Hills, who's also with us today. And you can find the report and our findings and recommendations on our website, and I'll post the link in the chat box. So we know there's a lot of skepticism in much of the labor movement and in communities throughout the country about the idea of just transition. The transition we need is going to be on a scale that we've rarely ever had to take on. So we figured the best way to make sure that economic transitions are just is by learning firsthand from the people that have lived through them, hearing the stories as we did from Sam Scott earlier today. We conducted over 100 interviews in 26 states with folks from a range of industries, including oil refining, auto manufacturing, textiles, healthcare, agriculture, and others. And the interviewees have experienced major job loss in their communities due to factory closures, downsizing, automation, the pandemic, and other reasons. These were in-depth interviews lasting up to 2 hours. And the stories we heard were both devastating and inspiring. Not surprisingly, the picture that these interviews told about our history of economic transitions was not good, just as we heard from Sam earlier today. Many interviewees described devastation in the wake of the plant closings, support systems that were wholly inadequate. They spoke of receiving job training for jobs that didn't even exist in their communities. They lost healthcare benefits, and unemployment benefits that were inadequate to begin with expired before they could get new jobs. And many were forced to relocate or lost family members or friends to suicide, alcoholism, or drug addiction. And also a common refrain was that people felt the loss of community and identity. The North American Free Trade Agreement was named as a root cause in many communities, which isn't surprising, since the U.S. Labor Department certified that nearly 1 million jobs were lost due to NAFTA. But we also learned of the ways that workers and communities managed these transitions, how they lived through them, how they found resources and provided mutual support. And I think there's a lot of good lessons that we can learn and ideas on how we can actually make transitions more just. One example that really stood out, for me at least, was rapid response programs. These are federally funded programs through the Labor Department, used to be in a number of states, and the programs are run by the states. But in the state of Massachusetts, for instance, the state AFL-CIO actually runs the program. So they set up an emergency response team that meets with workers whose plant is being closed and helps them connect to financial resources, social services, and career opportunities. I mean, it's really organizing work, and the folks that do it are come out of the labor movement. And it treats people as human beings rather than stranded assets. And we've seen similar success in places like Pennsylvania, and other states. We learned more about Colorado's Just Transition Program, which was created by a statewide coalition led by labor and environmental justice organizations. The program now gets bipartisan support in the state legislature to help coal workers and their communities in their transition. And then we also learned some about the Washington State Labor Council, which anchored one of the most diverse labor climate coalitions in the country. And although their ballot initiative, 1631, failed, it was able to win important climate and labor policies in the legislature afterwards. So, so there are other examples that are in the report, case studies. I saw a reference to the work up in the redwood forests in the chat box, and that's one of the case studies also in the report. So for economic transitions to be successful, it really does require a holistic effort and strategy, and Dr. Zabin, I know, referred to that earlier. Dr. Meejan Shah of Occidental College, who is also one of the authors of the Just Transition report, talks about 4 pillars. One is strong governmental support. So the economic transitions are happening all the time. Workers in fossil fuel industries are already losing jobs, not because of climate change, but as we heard, due to changes in the economy, the pandemic, and other reasons. And so we have to build the safety nets, as Dr. Zabin said, to make sure that workers and communities have the support they need to transition. That includes healthcare, childcare, pensions, expanded unemployment insurance, even expanding the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program to cover other things like a shift to a climate-safe economy and rapid response programs. Second is we need dedicated funding streams. So this includes major investments by the federal government. Colorado's Just Transition Program, for instance, is going to cost roughly $100 million a year. Without federal support, the state will be challenged to come up with those resources on its own. Third is economic diversification. Job creation, as Dr. Shah talks about, is the best transition strategy. And so, again, Dr. Zabin spoke earlier, and Dr. Robert Poland will speak in a few minutes about critical work in this area that they're doing, offering pathways for job creation and just transition in California. And fourth is strong and diverse coalitions. The most successful efforts we've seen are when labor is central to a process that includes community, environmental groups, and others. So our report highlighted IBEW Local 1245 in California as an example of labor, government, and environmental partners in the transition of shutting down the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant. Also, strong labor standards, which has already been spoken to, are really critical. And many of our environmental allies are increasingly understanding why the PRO Act, for instance, actually is an essential climate justice policy. So we're working with partners in the climate and environmental justice movements to make sure they're including high road labor standards as part of their agendas and policy proposals. So this listening project actually inspired another listening project that we started this year called the Young Worker Listening Project. During the climate strikes in 2019, led by youth climate organizations, we found that many young workers are actually involved in these efforts, and they talk to their peers about climate change, environmental justice, and just transition. Yet they're a voice that's often missing in mainstream conversations about climate change. So we're partnering with young worker programs, including the LA Young Workers and IBEW Local 11 Renew and youth-led climate groups to conduct a survey and interviews to learn more about the perspectives of young workers on climate change, how labor can be engaged in the issue, and build labor-climate partnerships. So we feel these voices, they're critical to build the bridges across the labor, climate, and racial justice movements because they actually really are understanding these intersections often more than some of us in the previous generations. So I'll also attach a link to the survey in the chat box and invite people to share that with workers and your unions and others that are 35 and under. And the last area I'll speak to real quickly is transit equity. So we've worked with Bay Area affiliates on Transit Equity Day every February 4th to commemorate Rosa Parks on her birthday because her refusing to give up her seat on the bus that sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, it wasn't just a catalyst for the civil rights movement, but also an important demand for transit equity. So each year, local coalitions made up of unions, transit right organizations, civil rights groups, and others, they do actions on February 4th to demand more affordable and accessible transit. Local governments are also honoring Transit Equity Day now, and Secretary Pete Buttigieg, Transportation Secretary, also did this year. So this is a real sweet spot for building labor climate coalitions because it creates good jobs in manufacturing, operations and maintenance. It addresses equity, disability rights, and it's also a critical climate solution. So I'm also going to put a link in the chat to testimonies, hearings that we did earlier this year on transit equity, hearing from workers in the industry and also transit riders and others describing the importance of transit in their lives. And one of the main ones I'm going to put in is from Steve McCauley from Smart 105 in Los Angeles, who left his job in trucking to work at the BYD electric bus manufacturing plant. It's a really moving story. So I hope you get a chance to view that as well. So I'll stop there. I know we got a lot to talk about, and welcome your questions and discussion.
So we're going to get to your questions. Remember, if you have questions for Michael or for Professor Obach or for anyone else we're about to start hear from, save them to the end. We're going to go through a whole Q&A. I want to thank you so much for being on here. Okay, next, we're going to turn this over to Gretchen Newsom, who's the political director of IBEW 569, who I like how everyone here is joining us from other places. So we had Turkey, we had New Mexico, and now we have San Diego. So it is my pleasure. Gretchen, why don't you tell everyone what the good news is in San Diego and what you all were able to accomplish in like the last 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Years.
Last Friday. We haven't rested since then, so I'm going to get into that real quick. So Gretchen Newsom, political director for IBEW Local 569, representing over 3,600 union electricians and power professionals throughout San Diego and Imperial counties. IBEW 569 has been, for a long time, at the forefront of combating climate change with meaningful investments in renewable energy and good green union jobs. Been doing this for well over a decade now at this local, before my time. Our members have built over 2 gigawatts of renewable energy within our jurisdiction, with an average of 80% local hire across solar projects in Imperial County, which is one of the highest unemployment rates in the whole nation. We were also one of the first building trades unions to hire a full-time environmental organizer direct from Sierra Club, because they know best. And that was Micah Matrosky, who just transitioned to being promoted within IBEW and now serves the 9th District. And her replacement, Christina Marquez, is going to continue a lot of that environmental organizing work. And I think Christina is online tonight and joining us as well. But in the vein of providing you with a real and very tangible success story of labor collaborating in strong partnership with environmental and social justice groups over a long-term convergence between labor and environmental groups, I'm going to direct you to what Josh just spoke about, the very recent win. Last Friday, our regional transportation and planning agency called SANDAG voted to enter into negotiations on a project labor agreement or community benefits agreement with the building trades in connection to our regional transportation plan on more than $160 billion of future construction work. That's a B, billion. Our second highest PLA that we've ever done is $3 billion. So we went from 3 to 160 billion. And this could be, I've heard that this is the second largest PLA in California, right behind LA Metro. I've also heard it might be the second largest PLA in the nation. This major victory did take several years and several gray hairs to come to fruition, and nobody believed 7 years ago that we would be here today. If you had taken a look at the political makeup of San Diego just 7 years ago, is much more conservative in a majority of the area of San Diego County, and we have chipped away at that and flipped it over. So it all started by labor collaborating with environmental advocates to identify common values and form a coalition to completely change the direction of SANDAG and our regional transportation network. I think all of you know on this call, but driving accounts for, I think it's 39% of state and 45% of the unincorporated county greenhouse gas emissions. So transit and transportation, significant factors when it comes to addressing climate change. And so if we're going to address this climate crisis, it requires the deep government intervention in transit and how people move about in counties in the state, as Carol Zabin spoke about previously. And that organizing work, again, started around a previous update to our Regional Transportation Plan, or RTP. Most of you will be familiar with that acronym, wherein we identified that SANDAG was not being effective in moving the needle to reduce greenhouse gases from cars, lowering vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, and investing more in mass transit and alternative mobility. So like-minded unions like AFT, Unite Here, and IBEW, which All of us had long-standing understanding and acknowledged that climate change is real. United with environmental and social justice partners to push back at SANDAG and to try to change the RTP. And it has been a really long, hard road, and it continues to be a long, hard road. But the very first step was to get everybody together, identify common values and a vision. And we all know that we're not going to agree on everything, on every topic, but it is deeply important as you embark on this work to identify your core values and then stick with them in your coalition work. So the Quality of Life Coalition was born. And I want to share with you our vision statement. I'll load afterwards the link to our website. So the vision is to invest our public dollars in a socially and environmentally equitable manner to build a vibrant, inclusive economy that delivers environmental and economic justice, lifts up communities, creates healthier communities, addresses the climate crisis, and ensures natural resource conservation. And here are our mission and goals. We seek to adopt a more sustainable and socially equitable pattern of land use, preserve, expand, and restore natural habitat and open space in the region, ensure adequate location in a variety of parklands, providing equitable access and appropriate recreational uses in the region, protect and enhance regional water quality while advancing a resilient, multi-benefit, low-carbon water supply, reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutants through enforceable measures, create good middle-class jobs, especially in vulnerable neighborhoods, and support the collective bargaining rights of workers. Expand and preserve affordable housing and home ownership, particularly near transit and job centers, and pursue transportation justice, which is the right of every person to a safe, accessible, affordable, effective, and healthy transportation network. So that took a while to get everybody on the same page, but once we're on the same page, we're all moving in the same direction. One of the core areas that we do a lot of work on is to, again, invest in social, economic, and environmental equity. And because this is largely a labor group, I'll share with you this, but there was many other components to this. But we sought to dedicate a majority of funding to communities identified as most disadvantaged. And for this purpose, disadvantaged communities are defined as the 25% of San Diego County's 628 census tracts, or 628 census tracts that rank highest within the region on the most current version of the Cal Enviro screen. And we also seek to provide training and work opportunities for county residents through a project labor agreement with 3 key provisions. 1, participation in state-approved joint labor management apprenticeship programs. 2, local hire with enforceable standards targeting vulnerable communities and populations like veterans. And 3, labor peace. So there's your PLA. And all the coalition partners all agree that this was a priority for them, and we would work collectively in that regard. There's much more that we're working on, but I'll elaborate a little bit more on how we got to the point of winning this major victory and vote for workers. And it takes, in essence, perseverance and persistence and guts. So after SANDAG didn't listen to us and our request for serious changes to the RTP, the Regional Transportation Plan, SANDAG started planning a ballot measure and a tax increase to fund the bad RTP. So a group of us, environmental labor organizations, started meeting to discuss the measure, specifically on how we could influence the contents. We circulated a request for input to a number of organizations. We gathered and gathered and gathered all the responses to inform our position on the measure, and that became the Quality of Life Coalition. And then when we reached out to SANDAG in hopes that they would engage with us, the community and workers in planning for a ballot measure, they refused to work with us. They were like, "Nah, you're just a bunch of community organizations and workers. We don't have to listen to you." That was a big mistake. So when we saw the final ballot language, it was clear that we had to oppose it. So we organized a campaign to defeat it. We raised under $100,000, and that was going up against multiple millions of dollars in support of the measure. We ran a lean, mean campaign pointing out the failures of the measure to protect families from pollution and wildfires. And this measure did split labor, as there were some that believed that widening freeways and building more roads and capacity for more cars and more pollution would create more jobs for their members. So that was that short-term benefit. So there were some that were supporting this measure. And then there were others like IBW 569 that said, hell no, that's not the right way to go. We need to think long-term, and we need to have a better regional transportation plan that does right by all the communities. So this is connected again to what Professor Olbach had talked about earlier, short-term concerns versus long-term collective interest, and the measure failed in 2016. So we also recognized, because you can't just stop there, you can't just kill something and then be like, okay, we're done. You got to build up, and you got to get what you want by making those investments and building the organization better. And just completely changing it. So we recognized that a change in leadership was needed at Sandag. We chipped away at the reputation of the then executive director, and he ultimately resigned. We then recognized that the power structure of Sandag needed to change. For too long, climate deniers within small cities were calling the shots for the entire region and prevented meaningful investments in mass transit and other values and priorities of the Quality of Life Coalition. So we embarked in drafting and supporting legislation to change the power structure so that the vote structure flipped from a tally vote of 19 cities, including all those little small cities that didn't believe in climate change, to enabling a weighted vote based on population, thus enabling the power to shift from the small cities to the larger cities that has the bulk of the communities and empowering communities to have a stronger voice. But to be successful, we needed the support and the alliance with the powerful legislative champion to get this thing through Sacramento. This is what would ultimately become AB 805. If you Google that, you're going to find a lot of stuff on it. But we needed none other than Assemblymember Lorena Gonzalez, who in my mind, and I'm sure that this opinion is shared by many, is the best champion of labor and working families. She is relentless. She changed Sandag. And if you don't know who Lorena Gonzalez is, please Google her right now and follow her work, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. She is the bomb. I love her. So then we also helped get a new leader at Sandag, somebody with real vision for impactful change. That's Hassan Akrada. He has been laying the groundwork to build a more robust transit system with the 5 big moves. It's another key term to look up if you're interested. Then some of us took on the effort to change the representation of certain elected officials at Sandag because AB 805 changed the power structure, but still you got to be concerned with who has those seats and those votes of power at the agency that you're trying to change. So some of us took on a very strategic, long-term political goal to change certain mayors, oust those that had been opposing working families and opposing climate action, and change it up. And so we did that during election cycles repeatedly. So now Sandag is again updating their RTP. They have new leadership. They have a new board. They're moving in a much more progressive direction. The new draft of the RTP is better than anything that we've seen before, but the coalition is still continuing to push the agency to be even better and to build back better sooner and address our climate and greenhouse goals sooner. I know what that face means. That means I'm only have 1 more minute. So then Friday we had the PLA vote. It was a relentless amount of energy to get this done, but we did it with our coalition partners and the building trades and labor deploying massive numbers of stakeholders to call in and testify and support. So in closing, be persistent, stick to your values, and make the tangible changes for progress. You aren't ever going to do it overnight. You've got to have like that long-term focus to keep doing it every day for years to go. And the last thing I want to say is God bless Carol Zabin and all of your work. You're so deeply appreciated. And that's it.
Amen to that. Gretchen, wow. And I saw someone say on there, like, is there a case study? This happened last Friday. I mean, like the whole thing is like, give them some time. Let them like catch their breath.
I haven't slept yet.
Yeah, come on, case study it up. But Gretchen, you'll be back in a minute. We'll have some questions with you in a second. Thank you so much. Okay. This is fun, right? This is really fun. Okay, JB, what's up? Welcome. I like how you just came on. You were ready to go. Everyone, this is JB Clark. Why don't we say JB Clark? JB Tango from the West Coast Director of the Blue Green Alliance. And JB, the floor is yours. Welcome to the Climate Convergence of 2021.
Thank you. I'm going to try to share my screen here. You guys see that?
We sure can.
All right. Let me just keep making sure that's everything's
good to go.
All right. Well, thank you all. So my name is JB Tenko. I work with an organization called the Blue Green Alliance, and BGA brings labor and environmental groups together to look at how can we address climate change in a way that creates good jobs. I myself come out of labor. I used to work for the state Fed years ago, then on to the state Democratic Party here. I have not traveled far. I'm only in San Francisco. But still I'm excited to be here. So BGA started about 10, 15 years ago with this idea of how can we really start to address these issues in a way that bring these groups together. We have labor on the labor side in BGA, we have trades unions, we have manufacturing unions, we have public sector unions. On the enviro side, we have what's generally called the big greens, Sierra Club, NRDC, EDF, Union of Concerned Scientists. And collectively, we try to really think through how can we look at ways to really think through climate and do so in a way that creates good jobs. Initially I worked primarily in California. I run our state's program, and we've had a number of successful wins around that. And I was really proud of this slide. I hope you all can see this. So here's just some of the things that we've been able to accomplish. I'm gonna see if this works here too. That's not working. Do you guys see a lighter pen light?
I don't see a hand, but I do see the screen.
Here it is. There it is.
There it is. I see it.
So, we've talked about different ideas of critical wins, and I think we've been really blessed to be a part of some major wins that have brought labor, enviro, EJ together. We've been able to bring these groups together on how do we start to commission 100% zero emission buses in California, which we'll begin to see. As we've done that, we've really looked at how do we ensure that the buses that we buy, I think Michael had mentioned BYD earlier today, and sheet metal, these ideas that we need to buy buses from companies that are good employers, folks that are union, that have targeted hires. So we've been able to add job standards on bus procurement. We've been able to do the same with school purchases. On the clean energy space, we worked in 5 states, Nevada, Washington, Colorado, Oregon. In Oregon just yesterday, I believe, or maybe it was 2 days ago, we passed a law there that they will now be 100% clean. In all of these states, Colorado, Washington, California, Oregon, they all have job standards invested in it. So many of the jobs as we go into renewable energy will be done in ways that create good union jobs and also with targeted hires. We're looking to do the same in offshore wind as we start to build out those policies. And we're seeing collective support for that both on the West Coast and the East Coast. As we look at manufacturing, we really looked at how do we bring again these same coalitions together to think through how do we buy products from manufacturers that have invested in developing their products cleanly. A couple of years ago, the Sierra Club, Steelworkers, Blue Green, and a whole host of labor, enviro, EJ groups came together to pass the first in the nation law called Buy Clean. And now the way California buys its steel or its rebar really takes that into effect. We've since added to that in Washington State the concept called Buy Fair, led by the Washington State Labor Council and our work on the ground there with our staff there, with this idea of not only should we buy cleanly, but we should buy fairly. So how do we also buy from those same companies that manufacture a clean product, but also do so with manufacturers that are responsible, that are good to their workers? We all know that there are good manufacturers and good employers, and we know that they're bad employers. And how do we ensure that if we're going to use state dollars, we do so in a way that rewards or incentivizes good manufacturing? In the building space, we've been able to do a ton with the same sets of coalitions. Just last year, we passed a bill with the NRDC, IBEW, the plumbers, sheet metal, EJ, on how do we clean our schools. So there are new investments in HVAC and water filters, also brought by that same coalition. That same coalition a few years ago looked at, when we look at energy efficiency investments, how can we do that with a skilled and trained standard to ensure that when we spend money to put in an HVAC system or advanced lighting, that we do so in a way that actually meets the savings we wanted to see. Work by Carol or Professor Zabin really highlighted that the single most important factor in showing that if you're going to put an HVAC system, that it actually reduces the energy that it says, is done by ensuring that the people who are doing it know what they're doing, which makes sense. We've worked with SEIU on developing a green janitor certification programs in California, Washington, Oregon. We're really looking at how do we build all of our buildings cleanly. Michael earlier today talked about this work in Colorado. We were really excited about that. So we literally wrote the bill, the language, and now the law that enacted the Office of Just Transition in Colorado, as Colorado is really dealing with how do you deal with the loss of coal industries there. It's a big issue, as Michael was saying, and we're continuing to think about it. We're just at the beginning stages. And what we know, sadly, more than anything else, is there have been more failures than there have been any wins in this space. And so how you do this really matters. We're tackling these same issues at the federal level with Biden and the American Jobs Plan, again with these same sets of coalitions, and looked at the same at how do we work in refineries, the refineries that Tracy and Sam had mentioned earlier today around, and the stuff that Tracy had said about really ensuring that the people working in the refineries have the ability to ensure that it's safe, not just for the workers, but for the communities. As we know, and as the folks there know, that when mistakes happen, and a lot of Richmond, unfortunately, was negatively impacted by some of those mistakes, that could be very dangerous. And so we've been able to bring those same coalitions to work on that. In the car space, both on trucking and electric vehicles, really looking at how do we add workforce standards as we build out this new infrastructure. And one of the things I'm really excited about here was in bringing enviros to support misclassification. The AB5 bill that California led a few years ago, and then similarly sadly in the losing effort for Prop 22. But we really got the enviros to understand that, we can put as many policies and goals that we want about cleaner cars on the roads, cleaner trucks on the road, but unless we fundamentally address the business models of companies that misclassify, we're not going to hit those goals. And so we've been really able to get enviros to understand this collective effort of it is both how we look at how we go green, but how do we do so in a way that creates good jobs, and how do we do so with companies that are good employers. And then lastly, we've been able to do a lot of this around water and natural gas. A few years ago, that same coalition led, again, some of the strictest language in the nation on finding and fixing leaks in California. So we've been able to see, as you look at this slide, that across the states and hopefully by the end of this year under the Biden administration, that we've been able to bring labor and viral community groups together to ensure that we're both addressing climate, but doing so in a way that creates good jobs. The way we look at it, and this is really something, I'm sorry. So I think one of the things that Carol had mentioned about fighting climate change is it's a lot of policies. I think we get really excited about thinking about the American Jobs Plan or the Green New Deal, but when you really break that down, it's a series of individual policies in wind, public sector investments, manufacturing, cleaner buildings, and the totality of that, you bring them all together, that's what ends up addressing climate change. And I raise this because I think one of the things that we see as we look at this and as unions and union members talk to us about how do we get involved, there are policies that there are ways within your industries and within your sort of sector of influence that are climate issues that are really sort of fundamental to your unions and to your locals. And it's so trying to think through what those might be that really helps us think through how we can address climate change in a bunch of areas. How we look at addressing climate change is something that I learned from Carol, is really these two concepts, climate policy and workforce levers. For a long time, when we thought about climate, we thought about, we got to get more solar or more electric vehicles. And what I think we've heard throughout this conversation over and over again is how you do that matters. We know that jobs will be created, but unless we are proactive about ensuring that those jobs are good jobs, we will create jobs. That is true, but we could create very crappy jobs. And so what we've seen in all those policies that I showed previously and what we continue to push for with our partners is how do we have a climate policy, be it cleaner energy, cleaner transportation, cleaner buildings, but then how do you marry that with the workforce levers, the blue side, the union side around job quality and job access? And it's really the combination of the two that kind of gets you there. I'm guessing I'm running out of time here.
Take a minute or so. You're good. You're great. Don't worry.
I'd say one of the 5 key lessons I've learned as I look at how we've accomplished this are really these 5, and particularly something to think through from a labor perspective. Knowing how it makes a good job is really important. So one of the things that we hear often, both from the labor side, from the enviro side, from the EJ side, is we need to go forward with ensuring that we, address this level of climate change. But being able to insert what is critical about how you ensure that is a good job. BJA spent a lot of time and continue trying to what that looks like. And again, we clearly do that with our union partners. They're kind of is a priority and relevant to your union. One of the things that we often see is our labor, we'd like to get more involved. And I think what we recognize is, your unions are stretched with so many policies and issues that we're fighting for. And so how do we ensure that whatever issues are coming up are something that's central to your union, which then makes it easier for them to spend the time and the resource and the political capital to make that happen. The third one is addressing cost and ease. I think one of the things we're really starting to see is that we've been able to prove time and time again that you can pay good wages, that you can have target hires, and you can still have labor, you can still have solar adoption, you can have wind adoption, you can have more EVs on the road. And we're continuing to have to make that case. We're not always there yet, but we're continuing to have to make that case. And then the last 2 are the ones that I've really come to fully appreciate over my time at BGA. The fourth one about listening to each other, I think, is fundamental to the work. What I've seen as I've dealt with frontline communities, EJ groups, labor, be it the trades to the public sector unions to the manufacturing unions, is that everyone's fighting for their community, and everyone is fundamentally believes that what they're doing is really important for the community they're fighting for. And one of the things that's critical about that is when you listen to them, you realize where they're coming from is fair. It's not fair to have to lose your job as we make this transition. It's not fair for fence line communities to have to bear the burden of toxic air contaminants. It's not fair for areas like Contra Costa if and when we transition from oil and gas to lose the billions of dollars that provides the community. None of that is fair. And so what happens is, as you get to number 5, is we get caught up in these positional points, right? We have to win our positions. As I said earlier, came from the Fed. I understand what it means to try to win your position. But one of the things that we've seen, and one of the ways we've been able to bring, when I showed that first slide, all those wins together, is really thinking through what is our goal? What are we trying to achieve? And then working backwards to think through then what are the policies we need to achieve that goal? And my work at BJ over the last 6 years has really shown me that it's these critical lessons that have really led us and helped us achieve some of those goals that we've been able to accomplish.
Thank you, JB. Okay, I am going to, if we can get the Brady Bunch screen up, and it is time to hear from our participants. So if you have questions, first off, I'm going to take a moment. I want to thank everyone who just spoke. I was amazed to hear from all of your stories and the wins you've had and the lessons you've learned. I'm sure other people are going to ask you a lot of questions. So Michael and Professor Obach, if you guys can also join us, that'd be sweet. Okay, let's see. So all you got to do, and people are going to help me with this, either put it in the Q&A or you can raise your hand and I will totally call on you and unmute you. So let me see if you have anyone with their hands raised. Carol, you can join too. What the heck? Come on, we'll do it all. Let's see. Okay, Sandy, you have your hand up. Let's start with you. Sandy, if you can unmute yourself. I'm going to ask to unmute. Sandy? Okay, I'm going to keep on moving. Like Sandy didn't. Sandy, if you want to try again, I'm totally there for you. Okay, I'm gonna. Oh, I saw Vince. Vince, can you raise your hand again? I didn't mean to lower your hand. I was trying to keep it orderly. Thank you. All right, so Vince, go ahead, buddy.
Thank you so much. Can folks hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Really appreciate this panel. I'm curious. I mean, I think there's a lot of understanding around how state funds
Vince,
can
who
be
are you?
tied. Oh, my apologies. I'm Vince Sugru. I'm with the Sheet Metal Workers Union, and yeah, really excited to be here. We're doing a lot of research into green opportunities, so I think it's great. One major thing I'm curious about, and I'm not sure who wants to take this on, but you know, I understand the whole state funding and being able to tie labor standards to it, but how do we, as labor, break into the residential solar market? Because I just feel like that is such an industry of growth, and then you have, you know, the Tesla batteries, which are just going to blow up, and not blow up, but they're gonna expand significantly in California. I'm wondering, how do we help unionize those workers? Thank you.
Can I take that since I represent those electrical workers
I
in
figured you were.
the solar industry? So here in San Diego, we have done some of that work. It's an ongoing challenge to organize and unionize solar workers, but two of our significant and large contractors, Sullivan Solar and Baker Electric, are both unionized with their solar workers. But how you go about doing that is kind of some of that pivotal public policy change that we spoke about earlier. And one of the concepts that we're trying to pursue right now is that as renewable energy is hooked into the grid, that any renewable energy, including solar, from individual residences should be paying prevailing wages. So that would completely flip it on its head. I already know that a lot of these contractors are going to say, oh, too bad us. We can't afford to pay workers to build solar. Yeah, whatever. You can afford to pay them. I've seen the cars that you drive. So yeah, and Mr. Elon Musk, good luck around the moon.
Yeah, I mean, again, in sort of the research that we've seen on that, right? If you look at the cost of solar, and Carol will know this well too, I'm sure Gretchen knows, you look at the cost of solar installation is only 20% of the total cost of solar. 15% of that goes to profit. 20% of that generally goes to marketing. So let's say that solar, and I think we all know that from a labor perspective, qualified workers, folks who really know what they're doing, save you money. But let's just give that idea that, all right, it might cost you a little bit more. Let's say it costs you 2% more. You're talking 2% of the total installation. 1% of that, you could still be profitable and still take a percent away from marketing, make life-changing impacts for workers, and not have any difference to the solar company, right? So I think from our perspective, as BJ looks at it, as BJ sort of being a policy wonky shop, really looks at, to Gretchen's point and to what Carol had said, is how do we use policy to say, all right, we are incentivizing this. We are using public dollar investments. We can say, if you're going to use public investments, then we need to attach these standards to it. And that helps with the organizing, right? I mean, then of course, labor's got to organize, but I think there are policy things that we can do to help on that.
Okay, we got another question. Victoria, allow to speak. You are unmuted if you would like to speak. Victoria, or you're there still? Okay, put your hand down. Okay, how about Norman?
I'm here. I'm
great.
here. Okay, sorry, I don't know how to finagle this stuff.
I barely do myself. You're great.
I'm a member for 46 years of the NALC, National Association of Letter Carriers. I happen to live in Richmond. I live on the fence line. My house has been tested by the city of Richmond for coal contamination. My house has major coal contamination. So I am basically a worker and an environmentalist. I don't like any kind of talk or words expressed as if we're different, we're separate. We are one. I am one. I am one. And so the thing is, when Carol said that if you belong to a union, you get better wages, I want to say that in San Francisco, letter carriers we're a union. We have a union. Guess what? 5 letter carriers are living in their cars, 1 in a tent. That is not okay. So, and the fact that the unions have been, the number of people belonging to unions have been going down, and we're kind of in a weak position. And I think the weakness reflects the fact that they don't value workers. I value, my dad, by the way, was a steel worker, and so were his two brothers in Detroit at Great Lakes Steel. So I've got all of this in me. And my question is, how come we're not discussing a 30-hour work week and at 40 hours pay? I don't think, I mean, I'm pay attention to what has happened in Detroit. There's a great documentary called Detropia. The auto workers that were lost their jobs due to NAFTA, either they went south or they went to Mexico or some other country. Yeah, I'm just saying that we need to, we're not separate. Workers, all workers, low wage workers, everybody needs to be part of this. And we need to have a real effort to make sure that anybody that loses their job gets exactly what they were paying for or more. So, and I wanted Samantha, sorry, a question I couldn't get in last time is Samantha. She got a job, but how many of her co-workers are gainfully employed? She said she's got a job she likes, but obviously doesn't pay as much. That has to be considered in this just transition. Thank you.
Perfect. And I'm going to answer this really quickly. And then we'll go to another one. Maybe other people want to answer this too. You see this right here? It's called the PRO Act. If we want to actually change the economic conditions for working people, that means we've got to organize. In order to do that, we have to change the rules of the economy to allow workers to organize. Right now, what Gretchen was talking about, Elon Musk, think about Jeff Bezos went to outer space a week ago. His employees are urinating inside of water bottles. That is a broken system. That's why we're going to pass the PRO Act. So that's our answer for that. This is how we get economic justice and change those dynamics, but we need your help on that. And I agree with you. It's criminal that letter carriers, federal employees, are sleeping in their cars. That's insane to me. And I want to thank you. But we got a few more. I'm going to ask Les, if we can, go directly to the question so we can have some more time for more questions. So Norman, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Real quick, so there's been a convergence before on all this. For those of us that are old enough to remember the stage 2 smog alerts, where businesses had to cut back on their production because the air quality was so bad. And we made moves and we moved through that and we've been better off for it. Jobs were kept. And as was mentioned about Teamsters, there's horses on their emblem, but they don't have much to do with horses anymore. So my question revolves around hope. Where's the hope? And I speak as a refinery worker. I work for Marathon as well. Fortunately, our doors are still open. But as with Sam's case, a multi-generational family, there's tons of those. 3 generations of the same family, aunts, uncles, and then the expectations that the next generation would move into these jobs as well. So there's a lot of good talk, but how do we boost people's hope?
Gotta have hope. Anybody want to talk about hope? Michael, you went off mute first. I saw you move quickly. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, thank you for that, Norman. When I started off my presentation, I talked about how there's a growing labor climate movement in this country. And even when, I started this job 5 years ago, all of the different initiatives and collaborations that we're seeing around the country, the different state initiatives and coalitions that are coming together, the examples like what Gretchen talked about, that to me is where the hope is that people really are starting to come together across movements. And we're seeing powerful movements in this country that are growing as well. And despite what we're seeing in terms of the stalemates at the federal level, there is a growing group of policymakers and elected officials that are starting to understand these intersections as well. So I think there is hope. Time is running out. We do have to move with urgency, but we have to do it thoughtfully, and it does have to be a managed transition. But I think in the way that these conversations like this one are more and more coming together, I think that's a very hopeful sign.
Anyone else have anything on hope? It's a good thing to have hope. Any thoughts? I hope that you did, but okay. Sorry, bad pun. Okay, we got one more question. Martha, the floor is yours.
Hi there. Thank you very much, Martha Hawthorne, SEIU 10 to 1. It's been a great panel. And I have a question about the definition of clean, clean energy. This is for JB. I have really appreciated the work that Blue Green Alliance has done over the years, but I'm concerned about the position that your organization has on fracking as a clean natural fuel, which I don't think it is. And has it shifted over the years? I don't believe that fixing the methane emissions is going to basically stop them, but what is your position on fracking at this point? I'd appreciate an answer if you have time. Thank you.
You know, it's not an issue that we've dealt with much in the States, particularly in California on the fracking side. So I'd have to see what our position is nationally. I don't think though that I think that we don't actively engage on any issues either on supporting fracking, but I'd have to check.
Okay. That was a pretty quick question. I still have one hand raised, so I'm gonna do this. Sorry for people texting me saying we have to move. I like to have participation. So Sean, last question.
Thanks so much. Sean Brown, I'm at UAW Local 2103. We're Sierra Club employees. I guess this is for the whole panel. I know that the PROACT and other climate change work is being put into these omnibus resolution bills for the budget resolution. So I'm curious if there's any pieces of it that we should be advocating for as most important to moving the economy forward as quickly as possible, just because it seems like they're having a lot of trouble getting these bills through on their own in their complete form.
Anyone want to talk about the PROACT real fast about that?
Yay,
Griffin?
PROACT, go PROACT. And also included in infrastructure, IBEW would really like to see come to fruition the investment in electric vehicle charging stations. We are training all of our apprentices that when they graduate, they are EVITP certified, electric vehicle infrastructure training program. It's an additional certification so that regardless of what company owns the EV infrastructure, we are well versed and knowledgeable on all of the types of technology on that. So yay, EVs.
Okay, and I said that was going to be the last one, but I lied. I'm going to have the International Vice President of the Boilermakers talk in 1 second as he raises his hand. I'll let Vice President Baca talk in 1 second. But also, what's really important, now don't keep raising your hands. I said I'm going to get one more person in. With the PROACT too, is that we have to have change in the rules right now of the Senate. The rules are broken. These are rules brought to you by Jim Crow era that need to radically change if we're going to have any form of changing the voting rights in our system right now. That radically need to be changed to make sure the PROACT's passed, to make sure anything's passed in our country. We need to have leadership at the top to actually do that. So, okay, Vice President Baca, the floor is yours. We can't hear you though. I can hear you now.
Yeah, you know, I do this all the time, and I still don't unmute myself. You know, can I ever figure it out? You know, Desanya was trying to call me while we were on this call, and I asked them, are we going to get rid of the filibuster? It's so stupid. We're so stupid. Democrats are so stupid. You know, we let the Republicans, they screw us, and then when we have the control, we let them keep screwing us. But anyhow, from Gretchen, you know, since they don't seem to understand science, it's funny for a Boilermaker to talk about science. But since they don't understand science in the Assembly or the Senate, a Boilermaker will talk about science. We need a lot of charging stations. We need a lot. But they don't understand that you need to power the charging stations. Solar and wind and batteries are not going to charge the power stations for the next coming years. You are going to need fossil fuel for the next several years. So we need carbon capture. And now I'm talking as the Secretary Treasurer for the California State Building Trades. And during the transition, as our new one of our new campaigns, as our energy future, as a bridge to our energy future, carbon capture is the answer to our future for all of our natural gas power plants, cement, which gives off a tremendous amount of CO2, for our we don't want to shut our refineries down because it will not only displace them somewhere else where they're going to make the gas, and now we're importing gas, and you think we're paying a lot now. It'll go. We have studies from. I don't want to. Sorry, Carol, because my son graduated from Cal, but we have studies from Stanford where we would be paying $10 a gallon for the gas, and not only putting all of the trades workers out and the steel workers and the residual workers, but we need to keep our gas here and phase out. Boilermakers, believe it or not, were formed in 1880, and we are a heavy industrial contract union. Climate change is real, and the Boilermakers have been transitioning we started out with steam locomotives, steamships. We've been transitioning for 141 years. We would hope that people would leave us alone and let us transition into the next energy that's coming. We're not sure what it's going to be. We know wind and solar and batteries are going to be a big part of it. Of course, we can't get to 2045 with just that. There's going to be something else: hydrogen, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen. My staff is younger than me. They know more about that. It gives me a headache. But carbon capture is going to get us there. Am I talking too much?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyhow,
you have a question?
The power. Oh, it was a question. I'm sorry. I thought I was a presenter for a second. I apologize. We need carbon capture. We need to wean ourselves off of fossil fuel. We're not going to flip a switch. What is the question? That's how we have to get there. We have to be able to power our charging stations so we can go not just electric, but we're going to have charging stations for hydrogen also, and whatever else, and renewable fuels. Sorry.
Okay. Any thoughts on what Secretary Treasurer Baca said on charging stations, carbon capture, the need for these?
All of the above.
All of the above? Okay. I think you got off the hook.
I guess I'd say BJ is heavily looking into green hydrogen.
Cool. Okay. Look into green hydrogen. There you go. Okay. So everybody, I know you have more questions, but we have more panelists. We have more Brady Bunch screens to get to where you can hear from others. So I want to thank everyone that was a part of this. I want to thank everybody who participated and listened in. So JB, Gretchen, Brian, and Michael, thank you all so much. We'll talk to you real soon.